Okay, so let's just capture Jimmy James again. Right. Okay, and we're gonna make him a single guy. Just check that this is filled out, that's fine. Okay, save that. There we are. And that is essentially how you would manually capture a taxpayer in Taxplanner. So I think we can move on to capturing the financials. To capture financials, click on the taxpayer that you want to capture financials for. On the top, there's a Capture Financials button. Click that button and it'll open up the Capture Financials screen. Now again, just to note, this screen, when you're capturing the details, is always relative to the taxpayer that you have selected on the left. So in other words, if I've got Jimmy James selected here and I click on Capture Financials, it's going to be Jimmy James's financials that I'm capturing. You'll notice that the moment I clicked on Capture Financials, the list on the left here got disabled. And that is just a security measure for in the event that you accidentally click on somebody else's profile and you end up capturing financials for someone else. So we've disabled the list so you can't scroll through it if you've got a detail screen open. So if you want to select another taxpayer, you'd have to close this one's detail screen, go to your next taxpayer, and then open that one's financials. Okay. So capturing financials. I think the first thing I want to mention there is that financials that's captured for a taxpayer is done by period or by source document. So the first thing that you need to capture when capturing financials is to specify a source document record. And you do that by clicking on the add button on the top here. So these add buttons that you see over here is relative to the source document capture. So that's the first thing that you would do. So you'll click add. It will default to the entire year for the year that you've logged in as. So the period is from the 1st of March to the 29th of the 2nd, 2020. You can amend these if it's for a part period. There's not much required here again to fill in. Let's just say take again. That. Again, if you are using the SARS interface, you would have to fill out a lot of these details, especially the certificate number, the document type, whether it's an IRP5, the address details, the periods. Those things will all become required if you are making use of the SARS interface. Okay, for now, I'm just going to give it a name, leave it for the full year. Click OK. Okay, so now I've got that source document captured there. Okay, so everything that I'm capturing on the detail below here for income, deductions, and so on will be relative to the source document that I've got selected on the top. Okay, so if I'm capturing, let's just capture an income value here for 3601, and I'm capturing the value there. I save that. That value is relative to this source document. But you can have multiple source documents. So let's say you have a couple of part periods that make up your year, and you got financials attached to these periods. Then you would set those periods up as separate entries on the source document. So if I want to set up another document, you can have overlapping periods as well, just to make things a bit more flexible. So I'm going to capture my second source document for the full year as well, and make that an IRP5. So you'll see there, the moment I save that second source document, the bottom area here cleared out, which means that I've got nothing captured for that source document. But if I click on the top one, you'll see that my entry that I've captured for income reappears. So in other words, whatever document I've got selected on the top, it will show me the detail for that document on the bottom. So all the income, deduction, tax, and other values that you see on the bottom is relative to the source document you've got selected on the top. And that applies for all these calculator buttons on the right here. If you are capturing any one of these details, they will be relative to the source document that you have selected. So just important to note, be careful if you're capturing financials that you have the correct source document selected when you are capturing the financials. Okay, so I've just demonstrated how to manually capture income. You can click on the add button on the below the list boxes relative to the buttons below them. So you'll see that there's 3 buttons below each of these list boxes except for the other list box, and these buttons are relative to the list boxes above them. So if I click add here, it will be an income. Here it will be a deduction, and there it will be tax related codes. So if I can just show you, if I click on add under the income list box, it'll show me a list of all the income codes. All right, these are all SARS income codes. All right, and you specify the code that you want and the amount, 200. And then the description is the standard description that we get from SARS attached to that particular SARS code, but you don't have to use them. You can overwrite the code if you want to change it to something else. All right, and then it'll use that description instead of the standard description that comes up when you first click on the code. So it'll populate it with the default, but you can overwrite it if you so need to. Okay, and then if I click on deductions, it'll show me a list of codes relative to the deductions. And again, same applies. You select the code, select the amount, and if you want to overwrite the description, then you can do so. And it will use that description. And the same applies throughout. You'll see that there is an add button missing on the other list box. And that is because the other codes are generated for you. So in other words, when you're using these tax calculators or these capture calculators, if there is another code related to any one of these, then that will automatically be populated in here. So that's why we don't have an add button there. Under the tax, we have an add there. And that'll show me all the codes related to the tax area. So things like site PAYE, UIF, and the medical tax codes and so on, if you want to manually capture them. Okay, so that would be if you want to capture something manually. Okay, but we do have a bunch of specialized captures. And when I say specialized, it means you capture some information and it generates all the SARS related codes attached to those to that information that you've captured. So I'm just going to start from the top and blast through them. So I'm going to start with subsistence allowance. Okay, with subsistence allowance, you can specify details for a trip, either a local trip or a foreign trip. At this point, you can only specify them separately. You can't do a trip that has both a foreign and a local leg in the same capture. So if you have gone on a trip where there's a local portion and a foreign portion, you would have to capture them separately. Okay, so very simple. Give it a description. Select the start date, 28th of the 3rd, and the amount of days. Let's make it 3. Whether there's been meals included or not, and then the allowance amount. So let's make it 1,000. Let's make it 2,000. So what that does is it uses the limits that's been specified by SARS, and it works out if there's a taxable portion to your allowance. And if I save this, it will bring those codes through to your income and apply it to the relevant SARS codes. So you'll see that it's brought through a taxable value of 336 and a non-taxable value of 1664 income. Okay, so that would be the local portion of it. If I click on that button again, so let's say you've captured a subsistence allowance and you've got another one to capture. If I click on the button again, it'll ask me, do you want to edit the one that you've just captured, or do you want to add a new one? So if I click edit, it will open up the one that I've just captured, and you can edit the detail there. If I, sorry, wrong one. If I click on it again and I say add, it will open up the add screen, so I can then add another entry. So I'm going to do this one as a foreign trip. Let's say date, foreign days. Let's make it 5 days. Let's say we've traveled to Egypt. And then we need to specify the exchange rate for the currency of the country. So when we're capturing a foreign subsistence allowance, we specify the country that we've traveled to. And this country list is a list that is published by SARS annually. I'm not sure how often that list changes, but it's a list of countries with the relevant daily limits for each of the countries in their currency. So you need to select the country that you've traveled to. It'll tell you the currency that country uses, and then you need to specify the exchange rate for that currency. I think 0.95 for the Egyptian pound. And then the allowance amount. So let's make that 5,000. And in the same way, it will use the limits that's attached to that country and work out whether there's a taxable portion to that entry as well. And then if you save that, it will carry that through to the relevant SARS codes for that foreign trip. Okay. And then we have a bunch of print buttons next to these calculators. So each of these print buttons is related to the calculator that's next to it. So if I click on this button, it will show me the subsistence allowance report. So I'm just going to click on that now just to show you what it shows you on the report. So there's my two subsistence allowance entries. And the detail that I've captured for them with the amounts that it's calculated. Okay. We'll speak about the reports after we've gone through all of these calculators. So I'm just going to go to the next one, use of motor vehicle. Okay, here you have the ability to capture multiple entries in the screen here. So I'm just going to go and capture one. Let's say company vehicle and specify whether it's on a maintenance plan or not. Registration number. Yeah, model. Okay, the moment I put in the vehicle cost, you'd see that the fringe benefit value was calculated. I'm just going to put in the opening kilometers. And then the period that this claim is valid for. Fuel expense. Okay. And as you can see, as you capture these values, it works out the deductible value and the fringe benefit value. So if I save this, it'll stick it in the list here, but I'll have the option to capture a second entry if I need to, and specify the period for that entry. Just going to leave it at 1, and if I do capture multiples of these, it'll accumulate or summarize them, and the summarized values will then pull through to my detail section here. So I'm just going to save that one for now, and you'll see that it'll pull through the deductible value as well as the fringe benefit value to the relevant sections. As you capture these things, you'll notice on the right hand side here, the summary screen also updates. So as you capture income values and there's deductible values, in the summary screen will be a quick overview of everything that you've captured. Also to note, the summary screen is a summary of all the information, so it's not relative to your selected source document. It's a summary of all the information captured on all the documents. So if I should click on my second source document here and I capture a income value here, let's just capture 3601 again, make that 5,000, and I save that, you'll see that the summary screen updates. So it's not just for source document 1, it's a summary of all your source documents. Okay, so let's go back there. And let's move on to lump sums. Okay. With lump sums, you've got 4 options. You can specify if the lump sum is a withdrawal, retirement, death, or severance. Select the one that you're wanting, give it a description. Okay, and the lump sum amount. If there was any previously disallowed values, so in other words, if you had a lump sum in your previous year and there was a value that was carried forward to your current year, then that would be the place to specify if there was any values that wasn't allowed in your previous year. So I'm going to leave that as blank. If you have any previous lump sums, so this would be, in my understanding, someone with a bit more tax knowledge will be able to explain this better, but if you have multiple lump sums in a year, this would be the area where you would specify the previous ones. So you'd have your latest lump sum, which you would then specify as your main entry. And if there was lump sums before that, you would specify them under previous lump sums. Okay, so that would be the area to do that. Okay, you can see that it's calculated the lump sum tax according to the tables based on whatever the option is that you selected here. If it was retirement, then the values would change, death and severance. So withdrawal has a different table that it uses to calculate the tax. And it'll show you the entry that it's used, the tax table entry that it's used, and how it got to the taxable or the lump sum tax. If you have a directive from SARS, you can use that as well. So you'd select tax directive here, fill out the directive number, and then specify the tax that was issued by SARS. This is especially important if you are using the interface, because this detail is required when submitting your IT12. So the directive number would be required, and obviously the amount. So I'm just going to use the tables for now and say save, and it will bring through the lump sum, and whatever calculation will be part of the lump sum tax. Okay. If I want to, there is a way of capturing multiple lump sums without using the previous lump sums that we've discussed there. You'll notice that if I click on that button again, it doesn't allow me to capture a second lump sum because you're supposed to be specifying the previous lump sums in the previous lump sums list. But you can do it by specifying a second source document. So if on my second source document, I can still go in and specify a different type of lump sum. So if I have multiple different types of lump sums through the year, I can specify them, but you need to specify a separate source document for each of them. So that's just another thing to note. You can specify multiple lump sums, but they need to be on separate source documents on the top. Okay, all right. Okay, I'm just going to move on to interest and dividends. Oh, if you want to, no, I have explained that. I'll explain the multiple captures on a different screen. So I'm going to go into interest and dividends. Here you have a couple of options as well. There's basically four types of entries that you can capture here: local interest, local dividend, foreign interest, and foreign dividend. And they all have tax calculators related to them. So I'm just going to go through the capture. Local interest received from you'll notice that the spouse value is being grayed out here. Now, this has got to do with the taxpayer's marital status. If the taxpayer is married and you've marked that he's married in community of property, then the spouse entry will become available. So what happens is, if it's married in community of property, it will take the total of the two values and split them up 50% for the calculation. Okay, I'm going to save that and brings that through there. If I want to capture a second one and I click on the button, okay, it will give me the option. Do you want to edit the existing entry that you've just captured, or do you want to add a new one? I'm going to add a new one. I'm going to go select dividend. Okay, for the dividend, you have an option to select whether or not it's the real estate investment trust that you've drawing dividends from or not. So I'm going to leave it at that. And this has also got to do with how the taxation works. So that has an effect on the taxation. So I'm going to say I am receiving from him. Save that, and that will then draw through to the relevant codes, source codes. So I'm just going to capture for all of them. Oh, so once you have multiple entries, like I've got two entries for interest and dividends now, and I click on the interest and dividends button. Okay, it'll bring up an option. We found multiple entries. Do you want to select one of them and edit them, or do you want to add a new one? Okay, so if I want to edit any one of the two that I've already captured, I say select, and it'll give me a list of the two that I've captured, and I can then from here select which one I want to edit. Okay, so I select that one, and then I can go and change the values here if I've made a mistake or something's changed, and save that. If I want to add a new one, click on the button and say add new one, and it will open up the new screen. So I'm just going to go foreign interest. Save that, and we'll bring it through to the relevant codes. Capture the next one. Let's make it foreign dividend. This. And with the foreign entries here, you have the option to specify if you have paid any foreign tax on these investments, and that will then pull through to the foreign tax credits on the right here. So I'm just going to save it as such, and there's my 4 entries for interest and dividends. Okay, moving along to low interest loans. Very simple capture. It has a little description of the low interest loans. Some information you need to know there, and just going to give it a description. Amount, interest rate that you're charging, and it will work out a taxable value based on the values that you've captured. I'm just going to save that to show you how it brings it through. So there's my entry for the loan. Okay. Again, these buttons on the right here next to the calculators, they are relative to the calculators that we've used. So use of motor vehicle, if I can just draw that report, shows me the detail for use of motor vehicle. A lot of these reports are quite detailed. It shows you the formula that it uses, the values from the table entries, and how it gets to the deductible values. Okay, lump sums gives you a little list of the lump sums and the calculation, how it gets to that value. Interest and dividends gives you a list of the captured values. Okay. And in low interest loans, also what's been captured and how it got to the fringe benefit value. Okay, so rental income. Again, these calculators, they are limited to if you have a period that you need to select on any one of these calculators, that period is always going to be limited to the period of the source document that you're busy with. So in this case, if you have specified a period for the full year, then the calculator below that would allow you to specify any period between those two dates. But if you have a part period on the source document, let's say it's only for half the year up until June, then this period specification year will be limited to your end date that you specified on your source document. So that's just also something to note. If you're wondering why you cannot select a particular date, then just check that your period is correct on your source document. Okay, so I'm just going to go through and capture the values here. Original price, income received, interest rates. So if there's any repairs or expenses that you need to specify for this rental entry, there's a little ellipsis button next to that entry field that you need to click on, and that'll open up a detailed list for you to capture. So you can capture your repairs here. Okay, and then other expenses. Right. So that gives you a little summary of what you've captured. We have an option on the rental income where you can specify whether this entry is held in partnership and your percentage that you share in that partnership. So essentially what will happen is if you specify 10%, for example, it will use the 10% value that it calculates from the totals that you've captured and draw that value through to your income on your detail on the main screen. So just something to note there as well. If you have an entry that is held in partnership with someone else, capture the totals and then specify the partnership percentage. So I'm just going to leave it as the full amount and then save that. So it'll then bring through that entry into your income there. If you want to, just again, if you want to use your own descriptions, you'll see that it fills in a default description there. You can overwrite that. So you can call that something else. Save that, and it will use that description on the reports. Okay, so that's rental income. Business income, quite a few options here. There's essentially three areas of capture that you can capture on business income. It's the assets and liabilities, the profit and loss, and the excess capture. Now, just one thing to note, the value that it brings through to your income is actually only relative to the profit and loss. So if you wanting to bring through a business income and a value that has an effect on your taxable amount, then you need to capture the profit and loss for that business. That is the only area that is brought through to this area here. In other words, a value. See, there's a value that's being brought through there now. That value comes from profit and loss. So whatever values I capture here, so for example, if I capture a few values here, um, and I have a 15,000 net profit, that value will be brought through to my business income there, 15,000. And the net of what I capture between income and expenses. So if I should capture an expense here of, let's make it 5,000. Right, the net effect of that is 10,000, and that would be the value that draws through to my business income entry here. Okay, so the other two areas of entry is actually on their own. They have no effect on the net profit that you're bringing through as your value for business income. They do live under the business income capture screen, but they don't have any effect on the value of the amount that's brought through to your taxable calculation. They are purely for reporting. So just to the starting point for the capturing of this information here is the categories. So you'll notice that there's a bunch of categories listed under assets, liabilities. If I click on profit and loss, there's a bunch of categories listed there. If I click on the excess capture, there's a bunch of categories there. So those categories are customizable, right? They are set up under the categories button on the left here. If I click on categories and I select the category type, so let's say asset, you'll see that all your asset categories are set up here, right? So if I add another category here for assets, let's call it test 2, right? And I close that, then you'll see that there's a test 2 that just popped up under my assets. So you've got control over what categories lives under each of these headings, right? So if I have a look under excess, for example, there's a bunch of categories here, but only sales is one that has been set up on the categories. So if I go under categories here and I select excess income, you'll see that sales is the only one that's been set up here as a custom category. These other categories that live under the excess section are brought through from what you've captured for that taxpayer. But we'll discuss that in a little bit. Let's just start from assets and liabilities. Okay. So once you've got your category set up for your assets and liabilities, you click on a category and there's a little ellipsis button that allows you to capture the detail for that particular category. So I'm just going to select test and I'm going to click on the little button, and it brings up a list where you can capture multiple entries. So if I add one year and say this is a house valued at 3 million. Okay, and I also have a half million. And I close that. You'll see that the values then gets pulled through to that particular category that it was captured under. Same for all of them. So I'm going to go here to liabilities. Okay, and that'll pull through to your category that you've captured it for. The same applies throughout. The same style of capture applies throughout. As I said, the assets and liabilities and the excess capture, that is purely for reporting purposes. So if I draw a report from this screen, I can view the statement of assets and liabilities. Let me just show you what that looks like. All right, so it will have the values captured that I've just captured now there, and it will show you the asset growth based on the values that I've captured. Okay, that's in statement of assets and liabilities. You can also capture information for the previous year. So under the assets and liabilities and the profit and loss, you can capture for the previous year. So I have a selection year at the top here. If I select, it will always show me the current year and the previous year. So in this case, 2020 and 2019. So if I select 2019, then whatever I capture at the bottom here would be for that particular tax year. So if I say capture a value year of 100,000, okay, this value would be for the 2019 tax year. Okay, and this is again purely for reporting purposes. If you want to be drawing comparisons between the 2 years, if you draw a report and let's say statement of assets and liabilities, and we say show previous year, also show me the details, and I print that, and then the 2019 values that I've captured will show up under the 2019 tax year. Okay, and that is purely for reporting purposes. It has no effect on your tax calculation or your taxable income or anything like that. Okay, for the excess capture, there is, like we said, you can set up custom categories for the excess capture, but it also brings through the values that you've captured for that particular taxpayer. So the excess capture is essentially items that you want to capture and bring into account on the disposable income report. So in other words, items that doesn't have any relation to your tax calculation, but they do affect, your cash flow. So those entries then get captured under this section. You set up your categories as we've explained, and you capture your entries according to that. So I'm just going to capture one here. Save that. Did not bring it through. Just check this excess income here. Let's just add one. Okay. Excess income. I'm going to capture that one there. Problem there. Anyway, I'll show you the excess report quickly. Let's just go there. Disposable income. Okay, so what the disposable income report shows you is what you've captured for that taxpayer. If there has been any excess entries that you've captured, and it'll then show you the effect it has on your cash flow. So it has a little cash flow analysis based on those values at the bottom. It also shows you the asset growth based on the assets and liabilities that you've captured. Okay. Again, these things are for reporting only. The values that you capture under this section doesn't have any effect on your taxable income or your tax calculation. Okay. I think that is it for the business income. I think we can move into medical. So on the medical calculator, also very straightforward. Give it a description. This would typically be the medical aid. Some of these things like the membership number is not required for you to capture at this point. It is important to note, though, that if you're using the SARS interface, it will be required. So if you don't have a membership number filled in and you try and submit an IT12, then you might get an error that you're missing a membership number. So a lot of these things have been added specifically to cater for the SARS interface. We haven't made them required because we know that a lot of our clients, just want to capture things quickly to get to a calculation. So we didn't want to make the capture process rigid and impossible to do at a quick rate. So we haven't made these things required to capture when you're doing the calculation. But it is important to note that when you're using the SARS interface, this level of detail is required. Okay. So I'm going to leave it blank for now. You capture the dependents. If the dependents are the same throughout the year, just check that value is the same for all months, checkbox, and then it'll copy the first entry across all the months. So I'm going to say it's 2 dependents, specify the 4005 value, the employer contribution, and then if there has been any disability expenses, physical impairment, out-of-pocket expenses, let's fill value in there. And then it'll calculate the fringe benefits and the S6A credit. And if there is a S6B credit, it'll populate that year as well. So when you save on this capture screen, it will then populate all the relevant codes. Like there's your 3810. There's your 4020 and your 4116 and your 4474 populated there. And it'll bring through any credits if there are any. If there was a S6B, it would bring it through there and update your summary and all the calculations automatically. The report, let's just draw that quickly. Medical report looks like that, shows you all the detail that you've captured and the calculation it's used to get to the values for the S6B and the S6A. Yeah. Okay, right. That's medical capital gains. Okay. Very straightforward. Give it a description. Date purchased. Okay, that pops up a little error message there if your date sold cannot be before your date purchased. So you haven't filled in the date sold yet. That's why it's giving you a warning. Just fill in the 5th of the 3rd there. Okay. Proceeds. Base cost. And if there was any amounts that was carried forward from a previous year, then that would be where you specify that, whether it's a primary residence or not, residential or local or foreign capital gain. If I take the primary residence off, then I'd be able to specify whether this is a financial instrument, a listed one or an unlisted one, etc. Also important to note for this, the married in community of property check mark on the taxpayer's personal data has an effect here. Also the deceased check mark that we discussed earlier on the taxpayer data. Let me just show that quickly. Okay. Taxpayer data. So this value here and this value here, those two values have an effect on that calculator. So if it was marked as deceased, then that deceased estate would be checked. Yeah, and if it was married in community of property, then that would apply as well, apply to the calculation as well. Let's just do this again. Okay, and save that. Okay, it will bring through the capital gain, and it will show you the capital gain, the taxable capital gain that that is calculated on the right in the summary here. Just as a quick view. Have a look at the report. All right, it will show you that that was a primary residence and you get your 2 million Rand primary residence exemption. show you the capital gain and the annual exemptions, and then apply the relevant percentages to the total. You can add a second one and it will just accumulate, and the values will then be applied to the total. Okay, so that's fairly straightforward. Travel deductions. Okay, here, if you have a travel claim that you want to do against an allowance, you can only do that if you have a travel allowance. So you'll see that this section is grayed out because there's no travel allowance specified. You can specify travel expenses incurred in the production of income, but let's capture a travel allowance here quickly. So I'm going to capture 3701. 60,000. Right, so there's my travel allowance. Where'd it go? 3701. Travel allowance. If I go back into travel deductions now, you'll notice that the travel allowance expenses, or the travel expenses claimed against an allowance, has now been enabled, and the travel allowance amount has been brought through there. Okay, so let's give it a description. Yeah. Make is a fill out all the detail. Cost price. And whether it's owned, whether you've kept a logbook, and whether it's been sold or not. And then again, the period that's specified here will be limited to the period that you specify on the source document above. Okay. Running costs, specify the opening kilometers, closing, business, fuel spend expenditure, okay. And then based on what you've captured, if you click on the deductible tab, it will give you a bunch of calculations. All right. Whether these different types of calculations still apply, I'm not sure, but it's there. You have the distance traveled rule, which is that 12,000 kilometer rule. You have the calculation based on the actual running costs, and then you have the calculation based on the cost table. Now it automatically selects the maximum deduction. So you'll see that based on the cost table is the maximum deduction out of the three different calculations. So it automatically uses that one, but you can select to use a different calculation if you so wish. So if I click on the little prompts in the front, you'll see that the deductible for this entry has changed to that value there. If I click on that one, it will change to that one. And if I click on the based on cost table, it will change the value to the value for that calculation. So I'm just going to select that one and say save. And you'll see it'll bring through the travel claim there. And these values will then be brought through to your deductible amounts, all accumulated here from your various calculations. Okay, cheap accommodation. Let's go in there quickly. See if I have anything to mention on cheap accommodation. Okay, there's a bunch of rules that you need to, or criteria that you need to comply with in order to claim for cheap accommodation, and you need to check these items on the top here. I'm not going to go through all of them. They have no effect really. They're just a confirmation that you qualify to claim for cheap accommodation. So you check them, and then you can carry on to capturing the detail below. So I'm just going to give it a description. Narration. To Okay, and then based on what you've captured, it will work out a taxable value based on what you've captured. Save that, it will draw that through to your income screen there. Okay. Okay, retirement deductions. Very simple. You have three types: pension, provident, and RA. Select which one you have, give it a description. Policy number is not required to be filled in at this point. You can leave that blank. But as before, if you are using the SARS interface, then these details become required. So I'm going to leave it blank for now and fill out the values here. Let's make it benefit. Okay. Again, if you have any previously disallowed values from a previous year, you can specify that year and it will be taken into account in the calculation. If I save that, okay, we'll bring the relevant values through to your screen over here. Okay, you can capture multiples of those. So if I click on retirement deductions again, you can edit the existing one or specify a new one. So I'm just going to specify another one. Let's make it an RA. Number. And as you can see on the right here, there's a quick reference that updates as you type. And that's just a reference to show you what codes these things are being applied to, just as a check to see if you're in the right area. Okay, let me save that. Brings that through there. If we draw the report next to the retirement deductions here, it will show you a list of what we've captured and how we've got to the claimable amount, and a little explanation of how it's calculated below that. Okay. And that is essentially it for capturing the financials. I think at this point, I just want to mention that there are other reports that you can draw. It's not just these ones that's next to the calculators here. If you go to the reports menu, if I just close this for now, on the top here, and I open the reports menu, there's a bunch of reports that you can draw from that menu. I'm not going to go through all of them. I think by far the most popular one is the one on the top, the taxpayers report. And this is essentially what it looks like. So it shows you all the detail that you've captured, categorized and coded, totaled, and it will show you all the detail and all the calculations, the tax computation below that. So all the values that you've captured, split up into income and exemptions, the deductions, the taxable amount, the rebates applicable, and the tax paid and the tax due. Okay, on the reports, there's some customization that's been made available on the reports. You can include a cover page. Now, the cover page is a little bit customizable. If you click on cover page settings on the button at the bottom here, it'll bring up the cover page settings window. And if I can just preview the current cover page just to show you what it looks like. So you can use different artworks or backgrounds or borders for your cover page, and then all the information that's sitting on the cover page, like the disclaimer and the contact details and the headings, those are all customizable on the screen here. So all these things here is what appears on the cover page when you print it. Okay, there are things that's obviously relative to the record that you got selected. So I've got Jimmy James selected, so Jimmy James will appear there, and whatever taxpayer you're busy with will appear there. But the other headings, like the top heading there, or the title, or the prepared by, those things are all customizable. You can change them on this screen, and you can leave them blank if you don't want any of them to show. Okay, and then there's a couple of different designs that we've got that you can use on the cover page, and if you have your own one, you can specify a custom background or border. And then the other thing that you can also do is you notice that on the report there's a logo, company logo, that you specify under, if you go to file, is it system settings? Yeah, system settings. You can specify an image for a company logo there. That company logo will then, if it's filled in, it will pull through to the logo on the reports. So in other words, that little graphic in the corner, top left corner there. And then the other way that you can customize the reports is, as you've seen there, there's a cell style, so in sort of a spreadsheet style look to the report, and then it also has these zebra stripes. So you can turn that on and off on the report screen. There's a little option here that says display the grid or display the stripes. You can turn them off and on interchangeably. So if you only want to see the grid, turn the grid on. And it will only display the grid. If you don't want to see the grid and you only want to see the zebra stripes, turn that off, turn that on, and so forth. If you don't want to see any of them, then you can turn them all off, and it will just be the raw data. And then if you want to include the cover page, then select include cover page, and it will bring through the cover page along with the rest of the report. Okay. And that's essentially it for the reports. There's a bunch of reports here. Some of them you'll see in the detail screens on the capture windows, but they are all accessible from this window. Okay, what's next on our list? Okay, so once you've got all your financials captured and you happy with your tax calculation, and you need to capture the actual tax paid by the taxpayer. You do that by clicking on the tax paid button on the top here. All right. Again, this is relative to the taxpayer that you've got selected. So if I've got Jimmy James selected and I click tax paid, that is relative to Jimmy James. So it's very simple. There's two tabs on this window. The first tab is the site and PAYE deductions, and there's just two entry fields for that. So you capture them there. So let's say 15,000, and you'll see that 15,000 has now been drawn through to the tax paid amount, right? And then the second tab is the provisional payments. So if this is a provisional taxpayer and you need to capture provisional payments, you'll do that under that section. And this is split up into three areas: first, second, and third provisional. There's a capture button for each of them. So if you go capture data under the first provisional, okay, there's a couple of options on this window. Just going to start from the top on the left here. The first area that you can capture is the last or the previous assessment. So details relating to your previous assessment. So the last year that was assessed is, let's say, 2019. The income value for that year was, let's say, 1 million. Capital gains, tax paid, these are all relative to the previous assessment. So let's just say it was 35,000. Okay. Once you've got that captured, you have a couple of options below that. The first one has to do with the taxable income. So the taxable income that you want to use for this first provisionals calculation, okay? At the moment, I've got it set to use the current tax year. So in other words, all of the values that I've captured for this taxpayer, use that value. So you'll see that the estimated taxable income is 106,970.62, which is that 106,970.4 rounded off. So that basically means use the values that I've captured in the system as my estimated taxable income. But I can also use the previous assessment. So if I say use the previous assessment, it will use the value that I specified on the previous assessment details on the top here. So now it will use my 1 million Rand taxable income that I specified there. Okay. If I say use 90% of the current tax year, then it will use 90% of that value on the summary there. Okay, I can, and there's different options. I can use lowest of the previous and current year, and I can specify my own amount if I want to do that as well. Okay, that's for the taxable income. I'm just going to say use the current tax year's data. The same applies for the employee's tax. Use the details from the database. Use the previous assessments details, or use an estimated value. So I'm going to use the database value. Same for the foreign tax, database, previous assessment, or estimated value. Okay, so if you look on the right-hand side here, the values obviously is updated dependent on what option I've chosen there. So I've got the tax for the full year, 33,959.38. As you can see there, it matches the value on the summary. Because this is the first provisional, it uses half of that as payable for the first period. Also uses half of the total that you specified on your tax paid, and brings through the lump sum tax. And if there's any penalties or interest that needs to be calculated based on the submission date of your provisional, you can use the calculator here. So you specify your date, and it calculates if there are any penalties or interest applicable. Okay, and then once you've got that specified, and you can then specify the actual amount that is going to be paid on this provisional payment. So I'm going to say, let's make it 5,000, and the date that you are submitting it, and if you have submitted the provisional or not. Okay, now this area here has got nothing to do with SARS. This is just a Taxplanner log of whether or not you submitted the provisional or not. So it doesn't mean that you've marked it as submitted that is going to submit your provisional return. We don't submit provisional returns through Taxplanner as yet. So this is just purely for your record to indicate that this provisional entry has been submitted to SARS. Okay, so if I save that, okay, it brings up the little penalty based on the date that you've specified, and then you'll have a little summary of what it shows there, and you can then print an IRP6 report based on the entries that you've captured there. Okay. The second and third provisional is very much the same. If I click on there, it's the same capture details. Only difference being it will take into account your previous provisionals payments when it calculates the amount that's due. But the values are, or the capture is very much the same options and same calculations. So I'm not going to go through that. I'm just going to show you what it looks like on the report. So now that I've captured one provisional payment, if I go draw the taxpayer's report now, and I go to the tax computation, you'll notice that there is now a provisional payment of 5,000 Rand registered there. Okay, and that came through from what we've captured on that screen. If we had taken off that submission flag on the provisional, so if we go here and we say, no, not the report. If we go here and we said that this has not been submitted yet, and we mark that as no, then that amount will not be brought through to the reports. It will only bring the amount through on the reports if you mark it as submitted. Okay, and that is basically it for the capturing tax paid. I think we can move on to the SARS interface.